Now we will start with the essay 530, Standard on Auditing 530, Audit Sampling, chapter number 4. You can watch the revisionary series into access 3.1.5 access as per your convenience. So the first is the sampling definition. The application of the audit procedure to a sample such that all the sampling unit have a chance of selection in order to provide the auditor with on which to draw conclusion about the entire population. We'll complete this definition later on. Let's understand the other terms of this definition. The first is it is in the interest of the auditor that if he decided to form his opinion on the basis of the part checking, it means sampling. With the shift in the favor of the formal internal controls, it means automated controls, the possibilities of the routine errors and the fraud have greatly diminished, and hence the auditor often find an extensive routine checking as less productive. There is nothing statutorily stated anywhere which is specified what work is to be done, how it is to be done, and to what extent it has to be done, and hence it is a matter of a professional judgment. Since statistical theory of sampling is based on a scientific law, it can be relied upon to a greater extent. The first we'll understand with the term population. Population refers to the entire set of data from which sample is selected and about which the auditor wishes to draw a conclusion. Auditor should select a sample item in such a way that a sample can be expected to be a representative of the population. Characteristic of the population. Memory technique is SCAR. C. Completeness. A. Appropriateness. And R. Reliable. So first is completeness. Sample needs to be include all relevant items. It means all the activities throughout the entire period. Whether the population is appropriate for the specific audit objective and sufficiently complete and accurate. That reliable characteristic of the population. We'll do this exercise later on after completing the sampling. First, we have seen the definition of the sampling. We select the sample from population, and now we are going to start with the other topic, sampling technique. First is random selection. Second is systematic selection, monetary unit sampling, haphazard sampling selection, and block selection. Random selection. Every unit in the population has an equal chance of selection applied through random numbers of the generator, for example, random number tables. For example, sample selected from 1 to 100, randomly number selected. So this will create a sample known as a random selection. Second is a systematic selection. Number of the sampling unit in the population is divided by the sample size to give an interval. For example, 50. Having determined a starting point within the first 50, each 50th sampling unit thereafter is selected. The auditor would need to determine that the sampling unit within the population are not structured in such a way that the sampling interval correspond with a particular pattern in the population. For example, there are 1000 of the population is there, and it is divided by the every 20th it means sample selection they want 20. So the interval comes as 50, which is stated in this example. This will be the 20 set of the data, and every 50th number will be selected as a sample. The next is monetary unit sampling. Type of the value weighted selection in which sample size selection and evaluation result in a conclusion in a monetary amount. It means a set of data is there, and in which the transaction about rupees 5,000, this is just an example, will be selected and thoroughly get checked. So this is a monetary unit sampling. Haphazard selection select the sample without following a structured technique, should avoid any conclusion bias or predictability, and is not appropriate when using a statistical sampling. Block selection. Selection of a block of a contiguous item from within the population cannot ordinarily be used in audit sampling because most of the population are structured such that items in a sequence can be expected to have a similar characteristic to each other. Value weighted selection and stratification. Value weighted selection to identify the sampling unit as the individual monetary unit that make up the population. Having selected a specific monetary unit from within the population, for example the accounts receivable balance, auditor may then examine the particular item, for example individual balance, that contain those monetary unit. This will be the value weighted selection. Stratification, dividing the population into a discrete, it means a separate subpopulation. Objective of this stratification is to allow the sample size to reduce without increasing the sample risk. Stratification by monetary value or a particular characteristic, result of the audit procedure applied to a sample of the item within a stratum, can only be projected to the item that make up that stratum. Now the next topic is approach to sampling. First is a statistical sampling approach, other is a non-statistical approach. Statistical sampling approach has the random selection of the sample unit and the use of the probability theory to evaluate the sample result, including the measurement of the sampling risk characteristic. Sample is selected by applying a certain mathematical and a statistical method. Non-statistical sampling, a sampling approach which does not have a feature of a statistical approach, is called as a non-statistical approach. The sample size and its compositions are determined on the basis of the personal experience and the knowledge of the auditor. This approach has been in common application for many years because of its simplicity in operation. Now, what is the difference between a statistical versus non-statistical approach? Main difference is that scientific and a non-scientific, biased and unbiased, and accurate and judgmental. Scientific and non-scientific. Audit testing done through the statistical approach is more scientific than testing based entirely on the auditor's own judgment because it involves the use of mathematical law of probability. Unbiased and biased. Statistical sampling has reasonably wide application, whereas the population to be tested consists of a large number of a similar item. It means payroll checking, vouching of invoices, and a petty cash vouchers. There is no personal bias of the auditor in case of a statistical sampling. The statistical sampling is criticized on the ground that it is neither objective nor scientific. In case of non-statistical sampling, the sample may not be a true representative of the population, and under some circumstances, the statistical sampling method may not be appropriate. Example, when exact accuracy is required, or in case of a legal requirement, then in that case non-statistical sampling would be a better option. The decision whether to use a statistical or a non-statistical sampling approach is a matter for the auditor's judgment. However, sample size is not a valid criterion to distinguish between the statistical and non-statistical approaches. The next is performing the audit procedure on the sample selected. Auditor shall perform the audit procedure appropriate to the purpose on each item selected. If the audit procedure is not applicable to the selected item, then the auditor shall perform the procedure on a replacement item. Example, when it is necessary to perform the procedure on a replacement item is when a voided check, it means a cancelled check, is selected while testing for evidence of the payment authorization. If the auditor is satisfied that the check has been properly cancelled, such that it does not constitute a deviation, an appropriately chosen replacement is examined. A replacement would then mean a proper and a valid check through which a payment has been made. Next is, if the auditor is unable to apply the designed audit procedure or a suitable alternative procedure to a selected item, the auditor shall treat that item as a deviation from the prescribed control in the case of the test of control, or a misstatement in case of test of detail. Example of a suitable alternative procedure might be the examination of a subsequent cash receipt together with the evidence of their source and the item they are intended to settle when no reply has been received in response to a positive confirmation request. Sampling result statement from a bare standard on auditing. The auditor shall evaluate the result of the sample, whether the use of the audit sampling has provided a reasonable basis for a conclusion about the population that has been tested. Projecting a misstatement. This is an important one. The auditor is required to project a misstatement for the population to obtain a broad view of the scale of misstatement, but this projection may not be sufficient to determine an amount to be recorded. When a misstatement has been established as an anomaly, it may be excluded when projecting a misstatement to the population. However, the effect of any such misstatement, if uncorrected, still needs to be considered in addition to the projection of the non-anomalous misstatement. In case of test of detail, the projected misstatement plus anomalous misstatement, if any, is the auditor's best estimate of the misstatement in the population. For test of control, this is for the test of detail. Now for test of control, no explicit projection of the deviation is necessary, since the sample deviation rate is also the projected deviation rate. In test of control, sample deviation rate is the projected deviation rate for the population as a whole. If the auditor concludes that the audit sampling has not provided a reasonable basis for a conclusion about the population that has been tested, the auditor may request the management to investigate the misstatement that have been identified or modified the nature, timing, and extent of the further audit procedure. The next is the advantage of the statistical sampling. Since we have already revised the whole the concept of the sampling, advantage is that the amount of testing sample size does not increase in proportion to the increase in the size of the universe tested. The sample selection is more objective and thereby more defensible. The method provides a means of estimating the minimum sample size associated with a specified risk and precision, and it may provide a better description of the large amounts of data than a complex examination of all the data, since non-sampling errors such as a processing and a clerical mistake are not as large. Here essay 530 got complete, and we'll start with the next essay 450, evaluation of the misstatement identified during the audit, communication and correction of the misstatement which identified during the audit. The auditor shall communicate on a timely basis all the misstatement accumulated during the audit with the appropriate level of the management unless prohibited by law or regulation. The auditor shall request the management to correct those misstatements. If management refuse to correct some or all of the misstatement communicated by the auditor shall obtain an understanding of the management's reasons for not making the corrections, and the auditor shall communicate with the TCWG, those charged with governance, uncorrected misstatement and the effect of that they individually or in aggregate may have on the opinion in the auditor's report unless prohibited by law or regulation. Auditor shall request that such a misstatement should be corrected. Written representation as per the essay 450. The auditor shall request a written representation from the management where appropriate TC those charged with governance whether they believe that the effect of the uncorrected misstatement are immaterial individually and in aggregate to the financial statement as a whole. A summary of such items shall be included in or attached to the written representation. Evaluating a materiality of the uncorrected misstatement. Prior to evaluating the effect of the uncorrected misstatement, the auditor shall reassess the materiality determined in accordance with the Essay 320 to confirm whether it remains appropriate in the context of the entity's actual financial result. Auditor shall consider the size and nature of the misstatement, the particular circumstances of their occurrence, and the effect of the uncorrected misstatement related to prior period. Now here essay 450 got complete.